The hegemony's fleet hung in Earth's orbit like a mechanical constellation, each vessel a testament to the Empire's technological supremacy. For 3 standard cycles, these ships had maintained their silent vigil, their dark hulls absorbing starlight while their sensors catalogued every human settlement, every defensive installation, every attempt at resistance. The message they broadcast was clear without words: submit or be consumed. In the underground chambers beneath Geneva, what remained of Earth's unified government huddled around holographic displays that showed the grim mathematics of their situation. The hegemony commanded 17,000 star systems. Their armies had conquered civilizations that had mastered technologies Earth could barely comprehend, and their latest demand had arrived that morning with the cold precision typical of their communications: total planetary surrender within 72 hours or face systematic orbital bombardment. Admiral Sarah Chen read aloud, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. They're offering standard terms: complete disarmament, technology transfer, and integration into their labor classification system. The assembled representatives exchanged glances heavy with the weight of species-ending decisions. They had seen the recordings from Kepler 442b, where the Zephyrian Collective had chosen resistance. The planet still existed technically, but its surface had been converted into a molten wasteland that would remain uninhabitable for millennia. "We have no viable military options," General Morrison stated flatly. "Our most advanced weapons are centuries behind their defensive capabilities. Our entire nuclear arsenal couldn't penetrate the shielding on a single one of their escort vessels." Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's foremost xenobiologist, pulled up tactical analyses on her personal display. "Their pattern is consistent across conquered worlds. They assess local resources, categorize populations by utility, and integrate useful elements into their imperial structure. Species that resist effectively are neutralized. Those that submit are preserved as workforce." The room fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Through the reinforced walls, they could hear the distant rumble of hegemony shuttles conducting their daily reconnaissance flights over major population centers. Each pass served as a reminder of the Empire's patience and overwhelming presence. President Martinez, elected to lead Earth through what everyone had hoped would be a period of technological advancement and peaceful exploration, found himself instead presiding over potential extinction. What about the negotiation option? They did include diplomatic protocols in their initial contact. "The hegemony doesn't negotiate," Admiral Chen replied. "Consulting intelligence reports gathered from intercepted communications between conquered worlds, they dictate terms. Every species that has attempted diplomatic solutions has either accepted immediate surrender or been classified as hostile." A new voice spoke from the corner of the chamber, quiet, but carrying an authority that made the others pause. "That's not entirely accurate." Marcus Webb had been Earth's chief diplomatic liaison for first contact scenarios, a position that had seemed largely theoretical until 18 months ago when the first hegemony scouts had appeared in the outer system. He was unremarkable in appearance. Average height, graying hair, the kind of face that would disappear in a crowd, but his eyes held a depth that suggested careful observation and patient calculation. "Dr. Webb," President Martinez acknowledged, "you found something in the contact protocols?" Webb approached the central display, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "The hegemony operates on a rigid hierarchy based on demonstrated capability. Every species in their empire earned its position through some form of proof of value. The mistake most conquered worlds made was assuming they could negotiate from positions of weakness." He manipulated the holographic interface, bringing up historical data from the hegemony's expansion across 17 different sectors. "Look at the pattern more carefully. The species that achieved favorable integration terms, those granted autonomy within their territories, allowed to maintain their cultural institutions, even representation in sector governance, they all demonstrated something the hegemony valued highly." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, studying the data streams. "What kind of demonstrations?" "Strategic thinking that exceeded hegemony projections, technological innovations they hadn't considered, or," Webb paused, highlighting a specific entry, "psychological insights that revealed vulnerabilities in their own systems." General Morrison frowned at the implications. "Are you suggesting we can somehow outmaneuver an empire that's conquered 17,000 star systems?" "I'm suggesting," Webb replied calmly, "that the hegemony's greatest strength, their absolute confidence in their superiority, might also represent their most exploitable weakness." The chamber's atmosphere shifted as the assembled leaders began to grasp the audacity of what Webb was proposing. He wasn't talking about surrender or futile resistance. He was talking about something far more dangerous, the possibility that humanity might have something the hegemony needed, even if they didn't realize it yet. Admiral Chen accessed Webb's psychological profiles. Webb, your record shows remarkable success in resolving seemingly impossible negotiations. But this isn't a trade dispute or territorial conflict. This is an empire that views us as resources to be catalogued and utilized. Webb turned to face the group, his expression carrying the weight of a decision he had been considering since the first contact. 23 years ago, I was sent to mediate a conflict in the Amazon basin where 3 nations had been locked in a resource war that everyone agreed was unwinnable for all parties. The fighting had continued for 8 years, with each side convinced that surrender meant annihilation. He paused, allowing the parallel to settle in the minds of his audience. The breakthrough came when I realized that none of the parties understood what they were actually fighting about. They were so focused on their immediate tactical concerns that they had lost sight of the fundamental dynamics driving the conflict. President Martinez stood, recognizing the shift in the room's energy. What did you discover? That the war was being perpetuated by assumptions all sides shared but never examined. Once those assumptions were challenged, the solution became obvious. Webb activated a new section of the display, showing detailed analyses of hegemony communication patterns, administrative structures, and historical precedents. I've spent the last 18 months studying everything we've learned about the hegemony, and I believe they're operating under similar unexamined assumptions about us. Dr. Vasquez examined the data Webb had compiled, her expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue. This suggests systematic patterns in how they evaluate species for integration. They're using assessment criteria that worked for previous conquests, but those criteria were developed based on species that evolved under different evolutionary pressures. Webb completed her thought. The hegemony has never encountered a species that developed the way humans did, through constant interspecies conflict requiring sophisticated deception, cooperation, and strategic thinking applied to opponents with identical cognitive capabilities. The implications began to ripple through the room as the assembled leaders grasped what Webb was suggesting. The hegemony had conquered species that were either technologically superior but socially simple, or socially complex but technologically limited. They had never faced a species that combined primitive technology with the psychological sophistication that came from millennia of humans competing against other humans. General Morrison studied tactical readouts with new interest. Are you saying we might be able to mislead them about our capabilities? I'm saying, Webb replied, that we might be able to do something they've never experienced. Show them exactly who we are, and have that revelation change their fundamental understanding of what they think they want from this encounter. The debate that followed stretched through the night, with experts analyzing Webb's theories from every angle. The risk was immense. If his assessment was wrong, Earth would face the consequences of appearing to challenge the hegemony's authority. But the alternative, complete surrender, offered no guarantee of survival and certainly promised the end of human independence. As dawn approached over the ruins of humanity's dreams of peaceful expansion into space, President Martinez made the decision that would determine the fate of the species. Dr. Webb, you have 48 hours to request a formal negotiation session with the hegemony command structure. If they agree to meet, you'll have one opportunity to demonstrate that humanity offers something they need more than another compliant workforce. Webb nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. As he prepared to draft a communication that would either save humanity or trigger its destruction, he reflected on the truth he had discovered in those Amazon rainforests decades earlier. The most powerful weapon in any negotiation wasn't superior force or superior position. It was superior understanding of what the other party didn't realize they needed. Part 2. The Architecture of Understanding. The hegemony response arrived within 6 hours, carried by a communication drone that materialized in Earth's upper atmosphere with the casual disregard for physics that characterized all their technology. The message was brief, almost dismissive. Human representative will be received aboard the command vessel Inexorable, will at coordinates 34.7 degrees north latitude, 127.8 degrees east longitude, orbital position stable. Transport will be provided. Duration of audience, 1 standard interval. Webb studied the coordinates as he prepared for what might be humanity's final diplomatic exchange. The hegemony had chosen a position that placed their command ship directly above the ruins of Hiroshima, a location that could hardly be coincidental. Their intelligence was more thorough than Earth's governments had suspected, and they were sending a message about the futility of human warfare before the negotiation even began. The transport that arrived to collect Webb was a perfect crystalline sphere that seemed to bend light around its edges. As he stepped inside, the interior revealed itself to be larger than the exterior dimensions should have allowed, furnished with surfaces that adapted to human physiological needs without visible sensors or controls. Every detail reinforced the technological gap between species, while demonstrating the hegemony's confidence in their absolute security. During the ascent through Earth's atmosphere, Webb reviewed his analysis one final time. The hegemony's historical pattern showed they granted meaningful autonomy only to species that demonstrated capabilities they could not simply acquire through conquest. The key was not to appear threatening, that would result in immediate destruction, but to reveal value that was inherent to human nature and could not be replicated through technological supremacy. The inexorable will was a structure that defied easy description, its hull shifting between geometric configurations that seemed to serve both functional and aesthetic purposes. As Webb's transport docked with the command vessel, he found himself led through corridors that adapted their configuration to his movement, always presenting him with a clear path forward while subtly communicating the ship's vast scale and complexity. The negotiation chamber was a sphere suspended within a larger sphere, its walls displaying what appeared to be real-time images of star systems throughout hegemony space. Webb was directed to a platform at the center of the inner sphere, where he waited as the space around him filled with the presence of the Hegemony Negotiation Council. The beings that materialized were humanoid in basic structure but clearly engineered rather than naturally evolved. Each stood approximately 7 feet in height, with elongated limbs that moved with mechanical precision and faces that showed no expression Webb could interpret. Their eyes were larger than human proportions would suggest, with irises that shifted color based on what Webb assumed were emotional or cognitive states. The central figure spoke, its voice emerging from somewhere within the chamber rather than from any visible mouth. Human representative, you have requested formal negotiation protocols despite your species' obvious technological inferiority and lack of strategic options. Explain the basis for your belief that negotiation serves any purpose. Webb had prepared for this moment by studying every recording of hegemony interactions with other species. Their communication patterns revealed a fundamental assumption that all intelligent species would operate according to rational self-interest based on obvious power dynamics. This assumption had served them well across thousands of conquests, but it also represented their primary blind spot. Honored representatives of the hegemony, Webb began, using the formal address protocols they had included in their contact materials, I believe we can provide value that your current assessment parameters have not identified. The central figure's eyes shifted from blue to amber, which Webb's briefings had suggested indicated heightened attention. State the nature of this claimed value. Before I do that, I would like to understand something about your expansion methodology. Webb activated a small device that projected a 3-dimensional map of hegemony space, highlighting specific systems. Your conquest pattern shows remarkable efficiency in identifying and acquiring resources, but I notice some unusual gaps in your territorial expansion. The Negotiation Council exchanged glances, their eye colors cycling through patterns that Webb suspected represented internal communication. The central figure spoke again. You presume to analyze hegemony's strategic decisions? I presume to notice that certain systems have been bypassed despite obvious resource potential. Webb replied calmly. The Rigel sector contains 17 systems with inhabitable worlds and advanced technological civilizations, yet they remain unconquered after being within your expansion range for over 2 centuries. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle harmonics of the ship's propulsion systems. Webb continued, understanding that he had touched on something significant. Similarly, the Vega Collective possesses quantum computing capabilities that exceed your current standards, yet they maintain independence despite being completely surrounded by hegemony territory. These civilizations provide specialized services that benefit from autonomous operation. The central figure said, its tone carrying what Webb interpreted as caution. Exactly, Webb replied. And I believe humanity could provide similar specialized services if you understood what we're uniquely capable of. The council member to the left of the central figure stepped forward, its eyes cycling through red and orange patterns. Human technology is primitive. Human military capability is negligible. Human resource extraction potential is modest compared to worlds already within our control. State your proposed specialization. Webb had reached the moment that would determine humanity's fate. Everything depended on the hegemony understanding something they had never encountered in their expansion across the galaxy. We specialize in solving problems that have no obvious solutions. The statement hung in the air as the council members processed its implications. Their eyes flickered through color combinations Webb had never seen before, suggesting communication patterns beyond his ability to interpret. "Elaborate," the central figure commanded. Webb activated another section of his display, showing historical data from human civilization. Every species you have encountered evolved in environments that rewarded either cooperation or competition, but not both simultaneously at high levels of sophistication. Humans evolved in an environment that demanded both, often within the same social structure, often directed toward other humans with identical cognitive capabilities. The display showed complex sociological maps detailing human history, the development of democracy, the resolution of the Cold War, the creation of international cooperation despite competing national interests. We developed psychological capabilities that allowed us to simultaneously compete and cooperate with opponents who could predict our strategies because they shared our cognitive patterns. The council member on the right moved closer to Webb's platform. "You claimed superior strategic thinking, yet your military response to our arrival demonstrated complete tactical incompetence." "Because we weren't trying to win a military conflict," Webb replied. "We were gathering information about your decision-making patterns, psychological structures, and assessment methodologies. Every interaction your forces had with human representatives was designed to provide data about how you process complex social dynamics." The central figure's eyes shifted to patterns Webb had never seen in the briefing materials. "You have been studying us for 18 months using methodologies you couldn't detect because they don't rely on technological superiority." Webb brought up his final display, showing detailed analyses of hegemony communication patterns, administrative inefficiencies, and predictive models of their expansion challenges. "We identified 17 strategic problems currently limiting your expansion efficiency, 12 administrative bottlenecks in your integration procedures, and 5 psychological blind spots that prevent you from optimal resource utilization." The chamber's lighting shifted as the council members entered what appeared to be intensive internal communication. Webb waited, understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether humanity had successfully demonstrated its value or had merely convinced the hegemony that humans were too dangerous to leave alive. The central figure finally spoke. "Present your proposed solutions to one of these identified problems." Webb had prepared for this moment by selecting the issue most likely to resonate with the hegemony's fundamental priorities. "Your expansion into the Kepler sector has stalled because the crystalline entities there operate on decision-making timescales that make standard negotiation impossible. They require approximately 47 standard years to reach consensus on complex issues, but your administrative efficiency demands resolution within standard intervals. This problem has been identified. Solutions have been attempted. All of your attempted solutions assumed that the crystalline entity's decision-making process could be accelerated or bypassed," Webb continued. "But the solution is to change your approach to time-dependent negotiation. I can design a communication protocol that allows productive interaction with civilizations operating on different temporal frameworks." He projected a complex flowchart showing multi-layered negotiation strategies that accounted for various cognitive and temporal patterns. "This methodology could be applied to similar challenges throughout your territory, potentially opening resources in systems you've classified as administratively impractical." The council entered another period of internal communication, their eye patterns cycling through combinations that suggested intensive analysis. Webb waited, understanding that they were not just evaluating his proposed solution, but reassessing their fundamental assumptions about human capability. When the central figure spoke again, its tone had subtly shifted. "Human representative Webb, your species' survival will be determined by your ability to demonstrate practical value rather than theoretical capability. You will be provided with access to crystalline entity communication records. If you can establish productive dialogue within 10 standard intervals, humanity will be granted autonomous status within hegemony space." Webb nodded, understanding that he had achieved the first phase of his objective. Humanity would have the opportunity to prove its worth, rather than simply being classified and absorbed. But as he was escorted to quarters within the hegemony vessel, he reflected on the larger challenge ahead, proving that humans could deliver on promises that depended not on technological superiority, but on the psychological sophistication that came from millennia of learning to understand and outmaneuver opponents who shared their own cognitive patterns. Part 3. The Quiet Revolution. The quarters Webb was assigned aboard the inexorable Will were more spacious than entire apartments in most Earth cities, with walls that displayed real-time views of star systems throughout hegemony space. As he reviewed the crystalline entity communication records, he began to understand the scale of the challenge the hegemony had set before him. 47 years of attempted negotiations had produced exactly 3 confirmed instances of meaningful communication, each resulting in responses that required decades to interpret. The crystalline entities existed as collective consciousness distributed across geometric structures that spanned entire continents. Their thought processes operated on geological timescales, with individual ideas requiring years to formulate and consensus building that stretched across generations. The hegemony's attempts at contact had followed standard protocols: establish communication, present proposals, negotiate terms, implement agreements. But the entities experienced these interactions as incomprehensibly rapid fluctuations, like trying to have a conversation with lightning. Webb spent his first day aboard the ship studying not just the communication attempts, but the hegemony's underlying assumptions about negotiation itself. Their entire diplomatic framework assumed that all intelligent species would recognize mutual benefit and respond rationally within reasonable timeframes. This assumption had served them well across thousands of successful conquests, but it created systematic blind spots when dealing with civilizations that operated outside their experiential parameters. On his second day, Webb requested access to the hegemony's anthropological databases, claiming he needed to understand how other species had successfully integrated into their administrative structure. The data he reviewed confirmed his theoretical framework. Every successful integration had involved species that could adapt to hegemony temporal and cognitive patterns. Species that couldn't adapt were either eliminated or classified as obstacles to efficient expansion. But as Webb analyzed the data more carefully, he began to see patterns the hegemony had missed. Several systems contained resources that remained unexploited not because of technological barriers, but because the required extraction methods conflicted with the psychological frameworks of local species. Administrative efficiency reports showed recurring problems with civilizations that had been successfully conquered but never fully integrated, creating ongoing resource drains that limited expansion effectiveness. The hegemony had built the galaxy's most effective military and administrative structure, but they had done so by minimizing variables they couldn't control. Their success came from creating standardized protocols that worked across diverse species, but this same standardization prevented them from optimizing their approach for civilizations that operated outside their established parameters. Webb's breakthrough came on his third day, while reviewing temporal analysis data from the crystalline entity's homeworld. The hegemony had been trying to compress the entity's decision-making process into shorter timeframes, but Webb realized the solution lay in the opposite direction: extending human decision-making timescales to match the entity's temporal framework. He drafted a communication protocol that treated each exchange not as a discrete negotiation, but as a single node in a conversation that would span decades. Rather than presenting proposals and expecting responses, he designed a system that allowed human negotiators to plant conceptual seeds that would grow within the entity's collective consciousness over appropriate timescales. The protocol required human patience that extended beyond individual lifespans, supported by institutional memory systems that could maintain continuity across generations. But it also offered the possibility of establishing productive relationships with civilizations the hegemony had classified as impossible to integrate effectively. When Webb presented his preliminary framework to the Negotiation Council, their response revealed the depth of his psychological insight into their species. The hegemony valued efficiency above almost all other considerations, but they also possessed a long-term strategic perspective that extended across centuries. The possibility of accessing resources they had written off as permanently unavailable represented exactly the kind of optimization they found irresistible.
Human Representative Webb, the central figure said after reviewing his proposal, your suggested protocol requires resource investment across temporal scales that exceed standard administrative efficiency parameters.
Yes, Webb replied, but it also offers access to resources that represent permanent expansion opportunities rather than temporary exploitation.
The crystalline entities control 17 systems containing exotic matter that your current technology cannot synthesize. Establishing productive relationships with them would provide the hegemony with manufacturing capabilities that could accelerate expansion across the entire galaxy. The Council entered extended internal communication, their eye patterns cycling through combinations Webb had learned to associate with strategic analysis. He waited, understanding that they were not just evaluating his specific proposal, but beginning to grasp the broader implications of human cognitive capabilities. Over the following days, Webb was granted access to progressively more sensitive information about hegemony expansion challenges. He learned about the quantum consciousness collective that existed in 11 dimensions and communicated through mathematical concepts that required specialized translation. He studied the records of the machine civilization that had uploaded itself into a stellar-scale computer network and now existed as pure information, making conventional diplomacy impossible. Each case represented a different failure of the hegemony's standardized approach to expansion. Their protocols worked brilliantly for species that operated within expected parameters, but created systematic blind spots for civilizations that challenged their fundamental assumptions about intelligence, communication, and social organization. Webb began designing solutions that leveraged human psychological capabilities in ways the hegemony couldn't replicate through technological advancement. Humans had evolved to navigate complex social environments where success required understanding opponents who shared their cognitive architecture. This had produced psychological sophistication that specialized in detecting patterns, predicting responses, and finding solutions to problems that had no obvious answers. The breakthrough that secured humanity's position came when Webb successfully established first contact with the quantum consciousness collective. Using a communication protocol that treated mathematical concepts as emotional expressions, he managed to convey the hegemony's interest in establishing mutually beneficial relations. The response, when it came, represented the first successful communication the hegemony had achieved with a post-physical civilization. The implications rippled through hegemony space as word spread that a primitive species had solved problems that had challenged their best strategists for centuries. Webb found himself summoned to progressively higher levels of the imperial hierarchy, each meeting revealing new layers of expansion challenges that might benefit from human psychological capabilities. The final negotiation took place aboard the Eternal Dominion, the hegemony's sector command vessel, in the presence of regional administrator Zephon 9, whose authority extended across 1,400 star systems. The chamber was vast enough to hold several Earth cities, with displays showing real-time administrative data from across the sector. Human Representative Webb. Administrator Zephon 9 spoke, its voice carrying harmonics that suggested communication across multiple dimensional frameworks. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that justify reconsideration of our integration parameters. State your proposed terms for human autonomy within hegemony space. Webb had prepared for this moment by studying the autonomy agreements granted to the few species that had achieved favorable integration terms. But he also understood that humanity's unique value lay not just in solving existing problems, but in identifying problems the hegemony didn't realize they had.
Honored Administrator, Webb replied, we request territorial autonomy for the Sol system, with rights to establish diplomatic relations with other autonomous species within your territory. In exchange, humanity will provide specialized consultation services for complex integration challenges throughout hegemony space. The terms he outlined went far beyond what any newly contacted species had ever requested, but they also offered benefits that matched humanity's demonstrated capabilities. Human diplomatic teams would be available to address integration problems, communication barriers, and expansion challenges that fell outside standard hegemony protocols. Earth would become the center for a new type of imperial service, solving the unsolvable problems that inevitably arose when a galaxy-spanning empire encountered the infinite diversity of intelligent life. Administrator Zephon 9 reviewed the proposal with analysis capabilities that processed data faster than human consciousness could follow. Your proposed arrangement requires the hegemony to acknowledge that human capabilities represent value beyond simple resource extraction or technological advancement. Yes, Webb replied, and that acknowledgement represents a strategic advantage for the hegemony. Every empire eventually encounters problems that cannot be solved through superior force or superior technology. Having access to cognitive capabilities that specialize in navigating complex psychological and social dynamics extends your effective expansion potential indefinitely. The negotiation that followed stretched across 6 days, with Webb presenting detailed frameworks for human integration into hegemony administrative structures while maintaining the autonomy that allowed human psychological capabilities to function effectively. The challenge was creating an arrangement that satisfied the hegemony's need for efficient control while preserving the independence that made human problem-solving valuable. The final agreement granted humanity autonomous status within the Sol system, with Earth designated as a specialized consultation center within the hegemony's administrative structure.
Human diplomatic teams would be available to address integration challenges throughout Imperial space, with compensation provided through access to hegemony technology and resources that would accelerate human development across multiple scientific disciplines. As Webb prepared to return to Earth with news of humanity's survival and transformation into a valued partner within the galaxy's most powerful empire, he reflected on the truth that had guided him through the negotiation. The greatest strength any species could possess was not technological superiority or military might, but the ability to understand what others needed before they realized they needed it. The quiet negotiator who had walked onto a hegemony vessel as a representative of a doomed species was returning as humanity's first imperial diplomat, carrying with him the framework for a future where humans would spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors or subjects, but as the problem solvers who helped an empire understand itself. Earth received the news of Webb's success with celebrations that could be seen from orbit, but Webb himself understood that the real work was just beginning. Humanity had gained the opportunity to prove itself worthy of survival, but that proof would come through decades of demonstrating that their psychological sophistication could deliver solutions to challenges that had stymied the galaxy's most advanced civilization. In the weeks that followed, as human teams began training for deployment throughout hegemony space, Webb established the protocols that would define humanity's role in galactic civilization. Every human diplomat would be trained not just in negotiation techniques, but in the art of seeing problems others couldn't recognize and finding solutions others couldn't imagine. The man who had destroyed his weak self, the diplomatic liaison who had accepted limitations and worked within established parameters, had been replaced by someone who understood that the greatest negotiations were not about getting what you wanted, but about discovering what was possible when both parties transcended their initial assumptions about what they needed. Humanity had not just survived first contact with a galaxy-spanning empire, they had transformed the nature of that empire by introducing capabilities it had never encountered. The quiet revolution that Webb had initiated would ripple across hegemony space for generations, opening possibilities that neither species had imagined when the first alien vessels appeared in Earth's skies. The Empire had indeed underestimated humans, but not in the way Earth's military leaders had hoped. The hegemony's mistake had not been underestimating human fighting capability or technological potential. Their mistake had been failing to recognize that the species they were evaluating possessed psychological capabilities that could transform the Empire itself, making it more than it had ever been by teaching it to see itself more clearly. And at the center of this transformation was a quiet negotiator who had understood from the beginning that the most powerful weapon in any encounter was not the ability to destroy others, but the ability to destroy the limitations in yourself that prevented you from seeing what was truly possible.